all these arrangements which are there. So therefore, as a part of WTO measures to regulate international trade, they have got this particular item called TRIMS agreement, which talks about how do trade related investments. We are not talking about investments here um, which are not related to trade. That is, we are not talking about government exchanges, and we are not talking about loans which are official in nature, but this is purely related only to trade which can happen between nations of the world. So when you have the trade related investments which happen, there are some guidelines which are issued by WTO, which the nations of the world will have to follow. So let us see what these guidelines are. So you have, what is this terms? Yeah. So this is trade related investment measures, where you are talking about, how can the governments of the world promote even the domestic industry, but at the same time not disturb the international investments which are coming into picture. So earlier, because WTO was not there, they were 19. It was in 1995 that WTO came into picture, but from 1977 we had the GATT, that was a general agreement on tariff and trade. So under that particular agreement, articles are there. So Article 3 and Article 11 of GATT talks about, the trade related investments which are there between the countries of the world. Whereas here, the agreement, this particular agreement trims, it will prohibit the use of trims in certain cases which are not in consistency with these earlier articles which are there. This is as per Article 1 under trims that you have. This measure of trims, it applies to investments which are purely related to goods. So here we are not talking about services, we are not talking about intellectual property, we are not talking about intangibles. That this is basically related to only goods. So that's why the word trade is being used here, because trade is meant for exchange of goods between the nations. So therefore you have this one. Let us see the features of this one. When you see trims basically applies only to investments related to trade in goods. India is selling spices, US is selling computers, Italy is selling, say, carpets, Switzerland chocolates. So, and we are importing so many things. So, all the investment measures which can happen where these things are related to exchange of goods, that is basically related to your trims. Now, here it also talks about, in case you are importing a product, is the government giving you preferential treatment or any discriminatory treatment? Similarly, when your product gets exported to another country, are you being given any preferential treatment or discriminatory treatment? So this provision of trims talks about what kind of discriminatory treatment is being given when the product gets imported or exported. So does the nations of the world discriminate between domestically produced goods or goods which are being imported or exported from the other country? And this trims is not related to entry of foreign investment, because foreign investment is covered under FDI. So here you are not talking about FDI, FPI and all. That is all a part of your FEMA. Trims of WTO talks about only related to goods which are there. So imports, exports, and any kind of investment measures which are happening where imports and exports can be enhanced. They talk only about that. And trims is applicable to both, foreign as well as local firms which are there. Now, there are certain exceptions to trims. Basically, you talk about, when you are when there's a transition from GATT to WTO, and then during the transition period, there are certain exceptions which are there. And there are certain exceptions for the developing nations of the world, because their trade may not be as efficient as that of the developed worlds. And then there are also certain exceptions when you talk about equitable provisions. See, the countries of the world differ from one another in terms of many things. So you cannot be giving a equal treatment to all, but there is something called as equitable treatment. So therefore, you have a difference between the two. If you treat everybody equally, then whatever may be the benefits or subsidies or allowances which you are giving to one, that should be given to others also, which may not be necessary for them because they're already developed. So we are not, TRIMS doesn't talk about equal treatment, it talks about equitable treatment. So therefore, you have equitable provisions which are being made. Each one of this we'll discuss one by one. If you talk about the transition which is happening, notification of any kind of inconsistency of TRIMS that should be presented within 90 days of entry into force. That was during that time, when from GATT to WTO, this was happening. That is a transition, 1994, end of 94 and beginning of 95. So in January 95, when WTO came into picture, during that time of transition, if there were any inconsistencies, those should have been brought to notice within 90 days. That was at the transition period. Then what is the time which is given to the countries of the world so that they can eliminate the earlier provisions which were there? Developed countries were given 2 years, developing countries were given 5 years, and the least developed countries, LDCs, were given 7 years, which were there. And in case these countries, member nations, had any difficulty in implementing TRIMS, then this transition period was a little bit extended. So that, because see, when you say coming out of coming out of GATT and moving into WTO, then when the change happens, the time period should be given to participating countries so that they will absorb the change. In case you don't give time to them, then the change implementation process will not be effective. So therefore, they were given 2 years. Developed countries were given 2 years, developing countries 5 years, and underdeveloped countries, the least developed countries, were given 7 years, so that whatever were the provisions under GATT, those provisions are now being removed, and you're adopting the new provisions of TRIMS, which was a part of WTO. And in case any nation had any difficulty for this transition period, then the transition period could have been extended for them as well. But most of the nations basically, implemented it very smoothly. There was not such instances where they sought for an extension period. This is the first phase of transition, seeking for transition. Then you've got, exceptions for developing countries. Exception for developing countries. Now, developing countries were being permitted to retain TRIMS as long as it was taking into consideration the measures which were given under the GATT's Article 18. So Article 18 was allowing for, whatever was the previous provisions which were there for economic development and the needs of the developing nations, those were still withheld. So the exception was for the developing nations, where the developing nations met all the conditions which were listed in Article 8 of the GATT. So in case they met all the provisions, then they were allowed to continue with those provisions only. That was also a measure that was being given. And because the competitiveness of the firms which are there will be affected in case you talk about imports, exports, and all the domestic industries have to be protected. So therefore, these governments who were a part of member nations of WTO, they were all allowed to apply the TRIMS for, during the transition period, they were all allowed to apply the old provisions only for related to all kinds of foreign investment, because at that time you did not differentiate. In GATT, there was no differentiation related to investment measures or intellectual property or FDI and all that. So they were during the transition period, those nations were allowed to continue to follow the same measures which were there. Then other provisions are there where you have a TRIMS committee and a consultation committee, dispute settlement committees are there, and upholding of transparency and all the provisions related to TRIMS, that was also there. Now, under TRIMS, because we say that you should also protect domestic industry, so there are some kind of restrictions which are being placed on investment. So let us see what those restrictions are, which are there on trade-related investment measures. So what kind of investments can you do so that trade of goods can be improved. So for that, some restrictions were being imposed. So performance restrictions were there and restrictions related to market access were there. These were the two types of restrictions that were imposed upon to the countries. Let us see these two restrictions one by one. Under your performance restriction comes trade and local production. So here you talk about, what are the requirements to export and what are the requirements to sell locally. So if the same company is intending to export and this company is also intending to sell locally, then what kind of content should be there for local production and what kind of a content should be there for export production? And what are the requirements for selling in the foreign country? What are the requirements for selling in your own country? So is there a difference between trade and local production? If you see some of the products which get exported from India, they usually say export quality, or they would say marked for export, or they would demarcate, they would separate the domestic and the export production, because these products have to suit the requirements of the importing country, to whichever country we are sending. For them, they have to meet the requirements. So therefore, whatever you could produce for domestic one, the same will not be produced, for the same content need not be used, the same process of manufacturing need not be used. You can slightly vary, because see, within a territorial boundary of a country, you can consume given a period of time. But when you're exporting, probably if you're exporting through seaways, the product gets exposed to all kinds of perils of the sea and moisture and climatic changes which are there. So therefore, your production and your packaging has to be different. So these are the requirements which are there in your trade and local production and export performances. So TRIMS talks about the restrictions which are placed on companies which are intending to export, in terms of what should be the manufacturing process, what should be the content if you're producing locally, if you are selling, what kind of performances should the companies deliver when they talk about exporting. Then you have restrictions which are also related, or requirements which are related to capital structure and management of the company. Like what requirements do you have for local equity and what requirements are there for foreign exchange? So how much of an equity are you raising within your domestic market? And when you are exporting, then how much of earnings are you able to generate through foreign exchange? Because the money comes in the form of foreign currency when you export. And then when somebody is investing with you, then you will have to repatriate the profit back to them. So what kind of repatriation is giving back? So when a foreign investor, say for example, invests in your company for enhancing exports, then for that enhancement of exports that happen, probably you must be giving some shares to that person, and that person is eligible to receive dividend on that, or a return on capital invested. So therefore, you call these things as repatriation of funds and profits. So repatriation means giving back. So when you repatriate these funds and profits, there are some certain requirements and guidelines that you will have to take care of. And then there are licensing requirements within the country, technology transfer requirements which are there. And also you need to understand what is the nationality of the management, who is the management, who are the CEOs, the president, the vice presidents of the firm. All those things also has to be taken care. Then you also have to understand the requirements which are related to market access. How are the companies able to access the market? Whether they are functioning as an independent company in order to access the market, or they're functioning as a joint venture company in order to access the market. So market access requirements and requirements related to what kind of structuring policies do you have, that also has to be taken into consideration. And most of the times under TRIMS, no, the dispute is always between developed and the developing countries, and disputes which are related to the structure, that is related to management and management structure, such kind of. Let us see some of the disputes also which are there. If you see, disputes have always been there between Canada, Japan, between European Union, with respect to who would be producing and who would be importing and exporting, because these countries are developed countries of the world, and then they have got disputes among themselves related to production of similar products which are to be sold in the international market. So you have Canada, which is a dispute with Japan and European Union with respect to production of similar commodities which are there, with respect to supply of raw material of certain commodities which is available, with respect to supply of technology which is there in Japan and from Japan to Canada and EU. So these are the countries which are usually at dispute when it comes to trims. Apart from them, you also have countries which are at dispute which are to do with India, where you have the solar power mission of India and the nuclear energy mission of India, where India has been, especially to do with the recent climate conferences that India has attended, and where we are also talking about carbon emission and carbon control. And our external ministers go and attend the conferences and say that, carbon reduction. Actually, recent climate conference, if you see, it was not the G21, but the prior one, where they spoke about COP conference. Where they were speaking about what kind of changes are to take place when you talk about carbon emission, zeroing carbon emission. So we ended up saying not zeroing carbon emission, but on the other hand, it was related to carbon control. So there, the whole lot of dispute came in. So you have disputes there related to solar power missions in India, carbon emission, climate missions in India, disputes between Indonesia, EU, Japan, US, where they are related to issues of raw material supply, issues related to military forces being there from one country to another country. So you've got all these kinds of problems which are there as a part of your TRIMS agreement, right? So you have these as a part of your TRIMS. This is related to investment measures, where you talk about how the countries of the world are relating one another with respect to their investment related measures for enhancing their trade. This is one thing there in a part of your WTO. Then the next thing that you have as a part of WTO is related to GATT, which is General Agreement on Trade in Services. So here, when you talk about GATS, it is basically, talking about how do countries of the world take care of their exchanges related to services, where it could be any service. It could be services which are in the form of professional services. It could be services which are consumption abroad, consumption within a particular country. It could be services which are to do with MFN treatment and all that. It could also be things which are related to transport, maritime, financial services, tourism, education. These are all the things which are covered as a part of how the world nations are able to access the services which the other country has got hold over these services. So you talk about these things also which are a part of your WTO. So let us have an understanding on these uh, related to GATS. It's my PPT. One second. One second. Yeah, GATS agreement came into force from 1995 as a part of WTO's launch, which has happened. So this is your don't get confused between GATT and GATS. GATT is the earlier one, which was there when WTO was not there. So that was called as GATT, which is GATT. This is GATS, which talks about General Agreement on Trade and Services. So here, what happens is, the fundamentals which are there for WTO, where you talk about, WTO should be, what do you, it should be transparent. There should be no discrimination. WTO works on all these guidelines which are there. So when you talk about these guidelines of WTO, which is about being very progressive and having to have reasonable regulations in terms of working. Then there are services which are also there where you say these services are a part of your GATS. Now, here you're talking about basically those services which are intangible in nature, and you cannot levy any kind of what do you say, price tag to these services basically as such. So when you say trade in services, all these countries of the world, member nations who are there, they all have signed on these GATS, General Agreement on Trade and Services. And the one of the important principles of WTO is Most Favored Nation Clause, MFN clause, we call it. So member nations also agreed to apply MFN clause to your GATS as well. Uh, the MFN clause is not applicable at all times. MFN clause is if somebody has an idea about the MFN clause, it talks about what is the most favored nation, which a country can claim as a most favored depending upon what kind of advantages it has over the other nations of the world. So that way you understand, the most favored nation clause there, which doesn't mean that other nations of the world should not be favored. Though you apply non-discrimination by WTO, but at the same time, the member nations have also an advantage of something called as most favored nation, where given all the nations of the world, which nation can you claim as a most favored in terms of duties or charges imposed, or imports and exports that you do, international payments and transfers that will happen, mode of levying the duties which are there, for all these things, in case there is any advantage or favor or privilege or any kind of an immunity which you have with the one nation, then that nation can be regarded as the most favored nation for you. So the contracting parties can talk about, most favored nations which can be there. Otherwise, actual rule is that there should be non-discrimination. Nobody should be discriminated based on anything, where trade should be fair. But for some things, you can go for most favored nations, such as GATS. For GATS, the most favored nation clause is applicable where, say, for example, if I need IT professionals, then, I cannot say that you take IT professional from anywhere in the world. When I know that IT professionals are too much in availability is there for of them in India, and they are also available in abundant in China, then a country who would be requiring IT people, they better have a most favored nation clause applicable, because I have these IT people who are available to me in India and China. So I would prefer India and China to get these IT people rather than preferring any other people across the world. So GATT talks about the most favored nation clause which are there. Just let me share the slides with you. So if you see here, this is basically trade and services. As I said, it was there earlier also, but it was under GATT. It came under WTO from 1995, though the General Agreement on Trade and Services was there in the earlier GATT also. So it is not that only from WTO it came into picture. It was there earlier also. Once WTO was formed, it got merged. So it basically functions based upon, the all member nations agreed to this particular GATS agreement, General Agreement on Trade and Services, which means it gives rules and regulations related to services. In case people are utilizing services between the nations, then they have to follow the guidelines which are given by WTO as a part of your GATS agreement. This basically talks about liberalizing the services which are there. So banking, insurance, travel, aviation, education, professional services, accounting, auditing, all these are the services which are there. So it basically talks about liberalizing them, removing all kinds of restrictions on use of services between the nations. Nations of the world should be free to use the services which are abundantly available in another nation, which are not there in their nation. So therefore, that way it looks upon, liberalizing the trade in services, and also regulations which are related to investing in services, not only using services but also investing. Say for example, nowadays we are talking about new education policy, and then you talk about education sector having to undergo a lot of change. So we are also anticipating that a lot of foreign universities will come and start investing in India. Now when foreign universities come and set up their shops or set up their colleges, universities and all in India, we talk about regulating their investment. If we don't regulate, then they will charge prices, fees of the courses, which will be so high that our students will not be able to afford, or they will be in the clutches of loans and all, and um, end up with all suicidal tendencies, which will not be good for the education sector as such. So GATS will also talk about regulating those investments in the services sector, which is there. So all kinds of distortions, all kinds of risks which are there can be eliminated as such. Now, GATS basically functions through four modes. These four modes which are listed here, the functioning of GATT happens in the form of these four modes. That means the agreement, the general agreement on trade and services, it covers these four modes. First mode is called as the cross-border trade. Second is consuming abroad. Third is presence commercially in a particular country, and presence of people in a particular country. Commercial presence is presence in the form of company establishments, whereas natural presence is presence in the form of people. So you have the four ways in which a service can be utilized, and the agreement covers the utilization of services in these four ways. So you have the cross-border trade first, which basically talks about, it's like a normal form of trade. So here service also, like normally how goods will get transported or exported, imported from one country to another, service also will get transformed from one country to another. So cross border frontiers, and service passes from one country to another country. For example, you talk about service which is getting delivered through telecommunications, through emails, through network, or say for example, some of you want to learn something from Harvard University or Stanford. You don't have to go there. They offer a hell lot of courses which are free of cost, so you can just log in, and then this is utilization of an education service which is free for you, which is available on their website, and then you get certified. Some of the courses are free courses, which may last from 3 days to 3 weeks, while many others will be, the basic ones are free naturally. The others are all paid ones which are there, but at least the basic certification you can get. So what happens here? The service is being delivered through communication network online or through Skype classrooms, Meet classrooms and all. So it gets delivered in that form. So what are you doing? You are utilizing the service of our Harvard professors who are delivering those lectures, but you here in India are making use of that cross-border through network of communication. So telecommunications help you in doing that. Same way, outsourcing BPO services. So many American companies are using Indian outsourcing firm BPO services. So all this happens through your telecommunications. So therefore, that is the first one where you talk about the cross-border trade, where it is like, selling, importing, exporting goods. Same way you are importing, exporting service, but you're doing it through a telecommunication or some kind of a communication network which is architectured, and then you are utilizing that to do it. So your banking services, cross-border banking services, distance learning, outsourcing services, consultancy services, all this is nothing but the first one, cross-border trade. Then you have second category or the second mode where you say consumption abroad, where you talk about, the service consumer is moving into territory of another country. So services which are made available within a country for foreign consumers. Say we get students from abroad who study here. We have in Usmania University especially, and even in Ambedkar also, you could be having students who come from abroad. So we have a lot of students who come from Tanzania, Afghanistan. There are students who come from Sudan, the countries which are still developing. So we get a lot of students from there. Now, these people come here, stay here, and they consume the education services for a period of 3 years for a UG program, 2 years for a PG program, and then they go back. Then there are so many patients who travel from here to another country in search of medical treatment. Many people come to India also in search for medical treatment because India has got a good stand in terms of medical services also. So you have a lot of patients who travel to India as well for medical treatment, for education. Then you have people who travel abroad for tourism. That there are people who also come to India to see your what is that your Tirupati temples. Muslims go to Saudi Arabia for their pilgrimage. So these are all services which we are going and consuming abroad. Our people come and consume those services in India. So like that, you have consumption abroad. That is also a mode of delivery of service in the form of GATS. Then third one that you have is a commercial presence, where you talk about, services which are supplied by a company of one country, which is actually commercially present in another country. Commercial presence here is nothing but through establishment in the territory of another country which is a member of WTO. So like this is all to do with member nations of WTO only. So you can establish your branch office, you can have an agent's office who can deliver services and all in the foreign country. Say for example, you have SBI Bank, and then there are SBI Bank's customer touch points, which are there in the foreign country. So through their branch offices in that country, they are rendering services there. So there's a presence which is there in the other country. So that's a commercial presence, which you say. Then you have presence of natural people, that is individuals, foreign nationals of belong to one country, they go and render the services in the other country. So you have all these, like, you go look for employment or residency or citizenship, and then your entry and exit are being regulated by the respective countries' visa rules and laws which are there to stay there. So you have these four modes through which general agreement on trade and services is being there, and these are the modes which are there, but there are certain basic rules to follow for applying these modes. Let us see what those basic rules are when you talk about basic rules, or these are called as general principles also. In what way member nations have to abide by these rules and by the basic principles which are there when they talk about trading and services. First one basically talks about the MFN clause, the most favored nation treatment. See, each member in the WTO, they will be giving unconditional support for rendering services to the other member nations of WTO, and no favorable treatment should be given to any one country. That is what is the rule of WTO. There should be no discrimination. But however, a member nation is permitted to maintain to some extent preferences which they can have towards any particular country. Such preferences should not be lasting for more than 10 years. Say, for example, I specifically want trained doctors who should come to me from, say, China. So what I will do, I want doctors only from China, and I can exercise China being a most favored nation to me for a period of 10 years. So when India is looking for doctors to come and work here, I can look up to China and say, I want their doctors to come and work here for a period of 10 years. So that is your most favored nation clause, which is applicable here. So the basic rule actually says no discrimination. But as far as trade and services is concerned, for a period of 10 years, you can have a most favored nation clause, which can be applied by the organizations. That is first rule which is there, or the basic principle which is there. Another basic principle says that there should be transparency. Each member nation will have to publish a document and submit that to council. If you recollect, when we discussed structure of WTO, we spoke about a council on GATS council, or council for trade and services. So when you have Council for Trade and Services, this particular council will have to publish sh- this council will have to publish all the rules, regulations which are related to your services which are there. So guidelines, commitments, what is to be inquired, what kind of responses are to be given, what kind of information the nations may need, all that has to be given in a particular document to the Council on Trade and Services. Then market access and national treatment, that is also requirements which are there. See, there could be some sectors which are called as scheduled sectors. For such a sector, the specific obligations are applicable in terms of, say, for example, market access. Market access basically is nothing but, if there are certain sectors which are recognized as specified sectors, then if service is to be delivered in that particular specified sector, then how many number of service suppliers do you want? What is the total value of that service transaction? What should be the quantity of the service output? How many number of people are going to be employed? Are you going to get the service through a specific entity or a joint venture or anything? All these things should be there as a part of your document which talks about GATS. So that care also should be taken. Then national treatment, anyway, as we said, a commitment to national treatment, saying that all the member nations shall give treatment to foreign services and suppliers of these foreign services, so that nobody gets a preferential treatment. That national treatment clause is also there. Exceptions is that most favored nation can be taken for a period of 10 years, which can be there. Actually, national treatment is applicable, but in some cases you can go for MFN clause. MFN clause says no special treatment for anybody, but that service is not available to me in that country. That service is available to me only from another country. So when it is available to me in that particular country, naturally I will prefer that country. So the most favored nation clause will come there for a period of 10 years. For 10 years, I can take people from that country as well. Then you have annexures which are there, annexures related to exemptions from MFN, annexures related to movement of natural person, where you have to list all the guidelines related to migration, citizenship, visa rules which are there, agreements which are related to international air transport services which are there. That is also an annexure. In case you are rendering any financial services, then whoever are your regulators, their terms and condition guidelines. Say, for example, banking, then we have RBI, which has got rules and regulations related to a rendering of banking services. So you have to give that as an annexure. In case you are doing telecommunications, then you have got TRI as your regulator. Then you have to give rules and regulations related to TRI also. So like that, all annexures are there depending upon what kind of a service it is, and who is the regulator in that particular country for that particular service. As the WTO and the earlier GATT had lot of conferences which they were holding from time to time. These are all called as, the rounds which we say. So GATT ended through Uruguay round and WTO came into picture. WTO started having their rounds of meetings and all, where one of the important rounds was, held at Qatar, which was called the Doha round, and most of the agendas are carried forward even today. We call it as DDA, Doha Development Agreement. So Doha is the capital of Qatar. So right now, FIFA World Cup is going on there, right? So that was the place where WTO's conference was held, which was one of the most important conferences, which are still carrying forward many items even today. So one of the agenda items that they had, they called it as Doha Development Agenda. And as a part of that agenda, many things are actually proceeding. But then this got converted in 2010 into disciplines on domestic regulation, which talked about QLT, which is nothing but the licensing, technical and qualification standards which are there. So like that, you have because lot of changes are happening across the world. Nations of the world merging with one another, splitting from one another. So you have lot of changes which has happened in this. And then in 2011, they also drafted a draft which was called TISA, which is International Trade and Services Agreement. And from 2013 onwards, they wanted the countries of the world to start, following this particular thing. But then the event happened with Julian Assange of WikiLeaks leaking the document, and after that, this got stopped. That is International Trade and Services Agreement. The further drafts, they were not being made, so they stopped with that. But nevertheless, GATS is one important provision which is there as a part of WTO, which talks about how member nations of the world can utilize their services which are present in their country. So this also is a part of your WTO. So with this, we complete actually the major type of agreements which are there, that is TRIPS, TRIMS, and GATS. Now we will proceed to economic corporations which are there across the world. One of the most important economic corporation in the world is SAARC. SAARC is actually South Asian Association for Regional Economic Cooperation, where you talk about, countries of the world which are in South Asia. They have come together and they have formed this particular association so that the member countries who are there, they can trade easily. So that was basically the intention with which SAARC was actually being formed. SAARC basically was established in 1985, and it has got 8 member nations to it. So as I said, it is a South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. I'll just share the slide with you related to SAARC. Right. So, right, SAARC, established in the year 1985, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. 8 member nations are there. You have the member nations list there. So most of these nations are all still in the path of development. So none of them are actually a developed nation as such. They are all developing nations which are there, and some of them actually witnessing recession and also hyperinflation. If you see countries like Sri Lanka and Pakistan, which have already gone into the scores of recessionary tendencies. So this particular association is for helping the South Asian nations to see to it that they are more visible in terms of international trade, and they have cooperation among one another, so that the developed nations don't eat away their share in the international trade as such. So you have these 8 nations as the member nations. Then you have these member nations who have identified somebody called as the observers, so that they can observe their activity and they can suggest, because these are the other nations of the world which have passed through a lot of treaties, agreements, and all, and they have been in the scenario of international trade since a long time. So SAARC has requested these nations of the world to be something called as something called as observers who are there. So these nations you see are all observers which are there. And what does SAARC work for? They work for 7 identified areas which are there: communication, connectivity, agriculture, public health, energy, environment, and economic cooperation who are there. Right. So these are the 7 areas that with which they are working. Then why do they work? What are the objectives that they have? Welfare of people who are living in South Asia and improving quality of life. That is one of the basic objectives. Quality of life here is to do with not only standard of living, but also a peaceful and healthy life, how people live. That is a quality of life here. In terms of goods and services that you use, and in terms of the holistic development of an individual in that country. So you are talking about welfare of the people in South Asia here. Then you talk about economic progress, social progress, and cultural progress, because most of these nations share a similar kind of cultural and social ties with one another. So it is also working towards accelerating economic growth, social growth, and cultural growth within the nations, and collaboration for all this, so that they can be technical deals which are there, scientific deals, social and cultural ties. You have lot of funding also which happens between one another in terms of joint proposals, joint research which takes place, technical and social joint collaborations which happen between the SARC nations of the world. Like say for example, when you have you have India and Maldives, or you have India and Bhutan, then you have lot of agreements which are there between these nations in the field of technology and science and all, right? So that is basically their objective with which they work. So what are the guidelines or the principles that they follow? They usually follow the principle of equality in terms of upholding the sovereignty of the nations, upholding the territorial integrity. That means SARC member nations have agreed that they will not interfere or they will not encroach borders of one another. So when you have disputes related to borders of territories, the geographic borders, and one country intruding into the geography of another country, SARC upholds the principle that there should be territorial integrity. One member nation should not be encroaching the territory of the other member nation. That's how you see none of the member nations that we have goes into the territories of the other country and say that this is my land, because SARC upholds the principle of territorial integrity. Then it also says that there should be non-interference in internal affairs, so that there are no interferences which will come from the other nations to your nation's internal matters. So what cross-border matters in terms of trade and collaborations, investments and all, naturally they do mutual cooperation. But when it comes to matters which are internal to them, you see to it that there should be non-interference. That's how, when we have among SARC nations, India, Pakistan, both are members to it. So when you have, something's happening within the country and you have the external ministers commenting, we say that, it's there should be non-interference. So in internal matters, the SARC principle says that they should not interfere in the internal matters of the other nation country, other member nations which are there. And get into all kinds of bilateral, multilateral agreements which are between one another. But it should not be such that, it is damaging the intention of SARC. SARC is basically established for the 8 member nations which are members to it. So any 2 member nations cannot do something which is harmful to the other 6. So that is, it should not be contentious issues which are not upholding the SARC thing which is there. So that is also a part of it, principles which are there. Then how does SARC actually function? There is a head of all the states, which is called as a summit. So summit here is not to be understood as a conference, but here summit is understood as a body. So you have head of the state, which is called as a summit. Then you have the basic council of ministers, that is representatives from each country. You have a standing committee, then there is a programming committee, then there is a technical committee, and then there are working groups. Working groups, standing committee, programming, and technical committees are there. So SARC works through all these things. So let us see who all are the members to these committees which are there. So Summit, if you see, it's the highest authority of SARC, where it is with the heads of the states or the governments. So the prime ministers or the presidents, whichever country has whichever type of government, parliamentary or presidential, whoever is heading the government, they will be the highest authority in that particular association. There will be foreign ministers who will be members, and the foreign ministers of all the member nations will be a part of this particular council of ministers, who will be working towards those 7 areas which are identified. Then you have areas which are, free trade areas and common market, customs union, because they usually carry forward their deliberations through working groups, where the working group works in any one of these phase 2, and currently it is on phase 2, where you talk about developing these SARC nations. So trade liberalization, elimination of all kinds of non-trade barriers which are there, tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers which are there, and facilitating trade between the member nations. Basically, they meet in order to work towards all these things. Then you have a SARC secretariat. This particular secretariat was This secretariat was actually formed in the year 1987 in the month of January in Kathmandu. And you have a secretary general who is nominated by the member nations on a rotation basis. For every 3 years, you will have one secretary general who is heading the SARC team. And then you will have 8 directors who are nominated by the member nations. Their term also will be for 3 years. Then you have specialized centers through which SARC works. So you have all these centers which are listed. You have centers of excellence, they are called as, or they are called as regional centers. So you have regional centers here in India, also in Gujarat, you have a center that is SARC Disaster Management Center. Then you have got in Colombo, there is SARC Cultural Center, Energy Center in Islamabad, AIDS and HIV Center in Kathmandu, Agricultural Center in Dhaka. So you have different countries are there, and whichever country specializes in that area, you have a center related to that particular area in that nation. Then you also have, some other specialized bodies are also there in the form of, South Asian University, which we have here in India in Delhi. We can also take enrollment and then take degree from there. Then you have in Thimpu, you have the SARC Development Fund, which is arbitration council in case there are any certain areas in which they work for. They work for agriculture, rural development, biotechnology, communication, connectivity, trade, finance, education, culture, food security, disaster management. They also work on health, human trafficking, poverty elevation, social issues, which are project-based issues. They work on tourism, transport, women entrepreneurship, youth development, schemes for exempting people from taking visas in certain areas of science and technology. So they work towards that. And then they have, all these small agreements which they have signed for SARC to work properly. Like you have SAPTA, which is Agreement for Preferential Trading Treatment. Then you have SAFTA, which is for Free Trade Area. Then you have agreements called SATIS, which is for trade and services. This is only for these 8 people who are a part of this. Then you have SARC Finance. These are all sub bodies or agreements which SARC has signed with their member nations, right? So this is about SARC. More details are there, but for you it is not necessary, because when students specialize in international relations, then they have more about SARC. But for only international business, you have it as a subject and not as a specialization. So for you, this much should be sufficient with respect to SARC. Then next we come to specific within the country foreign trade policies which are there. Now, when you talk about India and why foreign trade is needed in India and what type of imports, exports you have, in India, you have the import export policy, which we call as EXIM policy. So EXIM policy is actually the policy of the government, which is announced in every 5 years. And for a period of that 5 years, all the provisions which are related to export, import, promotion, duty exemptions, special economic zone, all those things will be drafted as a part of that particular thing. The previous 5-year economic foreign trade policy of India was announced from 2015 to 20. And for every 55 years, you have the foreign trade policy which goes. So that way you have, again, next 5 years, the foreign trade policy which comes. The basic highlights of the recent foreign trade policy was actually related to the recent schemes which are being launched. Like you have the Make in India scheme. So under the Make in India scheme, the foreign trade policy talks about increasing exports and minimizing imports, because you are talking about making in India, consuming in India, and selling from India, and not importing. So foreign trade policy of India currently talks about focus on Make in India program for enhancing exports, which is there. But there are a lot of critics who also say that, Make in India program has not been so successful as it was actually aimed at, because of the funding delays and because of COVID also. which has happened. So that way there are some lapses which are there in the program itself. Then some new schemes also were introduced in the exim policy of the country, where you talk about MEIS. That is one scheme which says merchandise exports from India, where which talks about, exporting of specified goods into specified markets, MEIS. Then you also talk about SEIS, that is service exports from India, where you talk about notified services which are to be exported from India. So MEIS is merchandise, say for example, handloom products, books, leather, clothing, toys, or you say anything which is being sent from India to abroad in terms of exports, you call that as MEIS. Then similarly, services also, all types of services, your banking, insurance, BPO services, and all those things. So you had these two as a part of your foreign trade policy, exim policy. Then government also formed, clusters which were basically to do with how can you boost exports by skilling people. So within the country, they were having, government of India announced Skill India program. They announced Niryat Bandhu program. So because of that, there was a lot of skilling of people which happened, out of which clusters, trade clusters were formed, and they were able to export to the other countries. So when you do all this, import export, you have a lot of documents also which are to be used. So you have documents also which are listed in your material. You can just have a look at the documents. They're quite simple to understand. Some of them I already discussed while I was discussing there. Then you see the part which is related to foreign trade, and what kind of impact the technology has got on foreign trade. We also gave a running reference of that in relation to BPO sector and technology exchanges and all that. Let's come to the specific institutions which are there in India, which support. There's no PPT for this that I have made, because these institutions which are given to you are very, very small. So I am referring directly from the material that you have got, your own IB material that you have in your coursework. So from there only I am talking directly. Now, the institutions that you have, the first one is your DGFT, which is Director General of Foreign Trade. Director General of Foreign Trade works directly under Ministry of Commerce and Industry with the Government of India, where they talk about rules, regulation, laws in terms of foreign trade and foreign investment. And this particular ministry is headed by a director. That's why you're called as a Directorate General. So there is a director who heads this particular thing. And this particular ministry is actually a facilitator. It is not a regulator as such, but it is a facilitator. It will facilitate, how trade should take place, how investment should come, what kind of, how investments can be boosted. So it works in relation to that. Now, the basic functions which DGFT usually performs is whatever is the foreign trade and exim policy of the country, they will try to implement that throughout the country. So it works in coordination with the government department for implementation of the exim policy. Then these importers and exporters, when they are importing and exporting, they should have a unique identification number. So DGFT gives that particular unique identification number. Every importer, every exporter, they have something called as import export code. That is IEC code, it is called importer exporter code from India. So that particular code is being given by, it is like your how you have roll numbers to identify you, same way they have codes, importer and exporter, they have codes to identify them. So DGFT will issue codes to importers and exporters, so that for the purpose of identification, it can be done. Say, for example, if somebody with code number 007/2019, which was issued in that year, took a loan from a bank for doing foreign trade, then they will keep an update on how that particular importer is processing the loan, repaying thing and all that. So they are basically giving codes also. Then they also play the role in terms of setting standards for input output, for talking about, for talking about things which are related to controlling your exchange, controlling your duties, and that is payment of excise duties and all types of import export duties which are being levied. They will see to it that, they are prompt payments which are being done by these people. So that is one body in India which is helping in foreign trade. You call that as as DGFT. Then there is Exim Bank, the Export Import Bank of India, which we popularly call as Exim Bank, that came into existence in the year 1982, so that foreign trade can be eased through provision of money. Earlier, it was not a separate body, but it was a department under IDBI, Industrial Development Bank of India. It was a department, but later it became an independent body, which is there. So this Exim Bank, it is like a bank. So the bank provides loans to people. So same way, Exim Bank also will provide financial assistance to importers and exporters. So importers and exporters can look up to Exim Bank in terms of finances for their imports, for their export, in terms of refinances, in terms of taking finances for purchasing machinery, hire purchase and all, in terms of financial assistance if they are entering into joint ventures with other companies. They can look for financial assistance for underwriting shares to Exim Bank for in case their share is undersubscribed. Then Exim Bank also can help them in underwriting of those shares, writing off any kind of loans and all which they have borrowed. So it will basically help with respect to financing. That is also one institution which is there in India. Then you have one more body called ECGC, that is Export Credit Guarantee Corporation of India. This was earlier called as Export Credit Guarantee Corporation of India Limited, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of India. Now we call it simply as ECGC, where basically, you are talking about providing export credit and insurance to the exporters. See, as an exporter, when you are exporting, there is a whole lot of risk which is being involved in sending your products abroad. So there should be some kind of insurance which can be provided so that it covers the risks against all types of losses if it comes when you are exporting. Maybe say, for example, if I'm exporting through seaways and something happens to my ship and my entire consignment of the merchandise sinks, then then there is so much of damage that is being caused to me. So that particular merchandise, I can get it insured through ECGC, and ECGC will cover up give the insurance cover to me. So it's basically like an insurance company for exporters and importers, you can say that. So it will provide credit risk to exporters against any kind of a loss, any kind of an advice that you want on overseas investment and insurance, that also is being provided. All types of guarantees which exporter may be requiring, that also is being provided. So ECGC basically is for export, as the word also says, export credit guarantee. So this corporation basically works for exporters who are there. Credit guarantee is needed because you talk about risks which insurers will have in terms of loading, unloading, travel, in terms of ownership, in terms of perils of the sea, in terms of transportation, political interferences which can be there, or you also have cartels which will not allow the shipment to go. Political risks will be there, and risks which can come because of the commercial comprehensive risks, like commercial risks which can be there. So to cover all those risks, ECGC will be helpful to the exporters. That is also one more arrangement in India. One more body that you have in India is your Export Promotion Council. Export Promotion Councils are basically responsible for a particular product, a particular project, or a particular service. In case any company as an exporter wants any kind of a guidance and assistance, Export Promotion Council will help them. This is basically, non-profit organization where it will help an exporter to have an understanding of the international market, so that, exporter doesn't make mistakes. There will be some kind of a guidance which will be provided. So this Export Promotion Council will have data related to government policies. They have data related to international markets. They have data related to trade agreements, and also any exporter wanting to enter into any contract with any other importer of another country, the Export Promotion Councils will help them. There are many, because this is non-profit, there are many people who have come forward to form the Export Promotion Councils. No doubt they are registered as societies. So you have, say, for example, you have people in specific trade who have come together and form Export Promotion Council, like jute or gems and jewelry, or you have sports goods, cotton, handloom, plastic, synthetic, chemicals, cashews, carpet. You have so many, wool industry, wood industry. All those people have come together to form an Export Promotion Council so that their exports can be promoted in the international market, which is a non-profit organization formed on formed as a society as such. That is also one arrangement in Indian context. Then you have export processing zones. Export processing zones basically are designated areas which offer incentives and a barrier-free environment, so that foreign investment can come to the country and export can be promoted. It is similar to that of export processing zone, free trade zone (FTZs). In India, we also have SEZs, that is special economic zones. So export promotion zones basically are designated areas which are working basically for promoting exports in the country. So infrastructural facilities which may be needed, say storage houses which may be needed for exporters, or documentation process which the exporters want help. These EPZs will help them with all of that particular thing. So you have a lot of EPZs which are there in India. Some of them are most of them are located at a coastal area, so that shipping takes place through seaways. Most of the international trade happens through seaways. So you have many export promotion zones which are there in the this one. What is this called? Sea coast, like West Bengal and Cochin and Santa Cruz and Vishakhapatnam, because all these are the coastal areas which are there. So you have the export processing zones which are located at these places. So that is also one arrangement which you have in India. Then you have export oriented units which are there. Export promotion units which are there. These units, as you see, export oriented or export promotion units, you call them as. So they work towards processing of exports, increasing exports, earning foreign exchange, helping exporter with the latest technology, foreign investment, employment, and all. EOUs, we call it as export oriented units, which are there. For example, food processing. If your company is into food processing business, then you can have an export oriented unit which is doing this particular food processing, which will help you in selling your processed foods abroad. So that is also a part of it. I was just mentioning a running reference of special economic zones. From the year 2000 onwards, Government of India announced a special economic zones where a particular person who has a very good business idea and want to produce something which can be exported, Government of India will provide them space in a special economic zone, and so that they can a lot of benefits. It can be in the form of tax holidays, easy access to infrastructure, shared office spaces which can be there. Actually, that was a proposal in the year 2000. Then by the time 2005, it actually became an act, and you have Special Economic Zones Act in India as of now, which talks about enhancing the special economic activities related to export. And these people who are intending to export, you can say, for example, you have technology parks, steps, software and technology houses which are there, or you talk about infrastructural hubs which are there. So when your company is located in a special economic zone, you will have lot of incentives in the form of free trade, no barriers, no custom duties and all to pay. um, we'll pause for 2 minutes, please. And so you have these special economic zones where you talk about the exporter having to get a lot of benefits in terms of tax holidays, reduced duties to be paid, and easy access to infrastructure, and access to knowledge hubs which are there within the special economic zone, nearness to um, nearness to the areas which are around supply of raw materials, supply of cheap labor, and all that. So there you talk about the special economic zones, which is also a part of an arrangement which is there in the Indian context for foreign trade. Uh, um, Let us come to some of the last topics which are there, which are very general in nature, which talk about current trends which are happening in international trade. Um, Now, if you see the current trends which are there in international business, most of them are all related to technology, because nations of the world are banking so much on technology that the competitiveness of the nations are all dependent on, what kind of a technology they have, how strong their currency is, what kind of manpower they have got with them. So they are all banking on mostly technology aspects of it to do international trade, which is there. So if you see the current developments which are happening across the world, one is to do with the dependence on technology. One is to do with diversity. Diversity is in terms of whole world becoming small globe. So when you say global world, you talk about differences in terms of culture, differences in terms of diversity of workforce, differences in terms of value system of people, differences in terms of managing those diversities. So diversity management is also one of the essential thing. Most companies of the world, what they do training for people so that they can learn about how to mingle with others, and how to appreciate culture of others, and how to work in consonance with one another. Some of the big companies which have done wonders with respect to diversity training is your Toyota, international market. Infosys in Indian scenario, they have a lot of diversity education and diversity training programs which they do. So technology is one, diversity is one. Then you talk about, these technology transfers which will happen, because the technology is held by one country, and then you got to transfer it to another country. So there is a code on technology called TOT, transfer of technology code. So countries of the world today are talking about this particular TOT code, the draft which is there related to technology transfer. So that is also a part of it, where you have, a lot of categories to it: international transfer of technology, regional, cross industry, within the firm, sometimes also to do with transfer of engineering technology and reverse engineering, and also those are some of the things to do with technology also. Then how to do business with the use of technology? A whole lot of e-commerce platforms are changing. So you have the current trends in international trade in the form of changing supply chain and logistics, customer service in the form of outsourcing. Then you have inventory management, which is also, an e-business strategy it has become today. And then you have the daily operations of the business, which are also held through online. So you have social media marketing, e-advertisements. Then you have got all these all kinds of digital platforms which are being used in order to sell to the consumer. So you have a whole lot of technology which is used in e-commerce. Then the back end process also, not only front end to do with selling, but even the back end processes that are there also technology is being used in the form of blockchain. We have been hearing about blockchain since a long time. It is nothing but a digital ledger. So blockchain is nothing but a digital ledger where you will talk about, maintaining a database related to different kinds of items. It could be related to finances, it could be related to people, it could be related to anything where a smart technology is actually saving all the data and helping you to use the data according to whatever is your requirement. need. So you have the blockchain technology in international trade, which is being used. Then you talk about, the global value chain. If you see the value chain analysis, which you study in strategic management, you talk about the inbound activities, the outbound activities, and the processing part, which takes place. So in international business also, you have an international value chain where again you talk about the inbound activities, you talk about the outbound activities, and then you talk about, the kind of a framework which is to be followed for implementing all these activities. We also discussed, if you recollect, when we were discussing initially, I told you about Michael Porter. So Michael Porter's value chain, where you talk about how these value chain activities proceed in terms of inbound, process, and outbound activities which are there. So you have primary activities in terms of logistics. So you have a global value chain which is being designed, and then you have MNCs which follow the global value chain and look for suppliers who can come from abroad, look for HR which you can tap from abroad, look for outsourcing of some of the services which your country need not have to worry about, and you give it to some other country for doing outsourcing. Look for technology from other countries, so your value chain also in terms of technology. And then that is one part of it. So you have technology, you have diversity, you have e-commerce, you have blockchain, and then you have your things to do with value chain. And then there are also things to do with ethics, the upholding culture, labor relations, avoiding child labor, avoiding human trafficking, providing good employment conditions to people who come to work to you from other countries, upholding all types of human rights in the international scenario, giving up corruption in terms of not profiteering your business at the cost of other nation. Moral obligations are also there for countries of the world to uphold each other's integrity and all those things. So those are some ethical issues which are there. Then, as you see, COVID-19 has been one of the latest entrants to affect international trade also. And when COVID-19 disrupted, the global value systems, value chains which are there, most people from global, again, they went back to local only, because there were no exchange of people, no exchange of goods. Only digitization was happening. So people have been using all digital platforms which have become very popular since COVID. And during COVID, again, even, your technology transfers which have happened in terms of use of e-wallet, international e-wallets which are there, and no financial transactions which were happening online. All that was very nice, but at the same time there were issues to do with, core products being sent from one country to another country, exports, imports, having to suffer a lot. Sector wise, if you see, food sector was the worst to hit, but you had many sectors which also gained a lot of prominence, like sports, sorry, not sports, entertainment, where you had to go for many online ways of entertaining people. And then education, which shifted completely towards virtual classrooms. Some of the service industries which also went for virtual, like remote banking services and all. Healthcare, where you had teleconsultations, smart hospitals which were doing online. So you had lot of digitization also which took place in international businesses, but otherwise imports and exports were the worst which were being affected in the international trade. Right, those are some of the developments which have happened. So this was all about your international business. So if we just do a quick recap of what we have done since the beginning of this, when I got in touch with you all. The whole course was related to international business. So initially we started with the, my screen is still shared with you. I forgot. Okay. So initially we started with concentrating on what is international trade business. We gave definitions of it, and we went to understanding the characteristics and the components of it, and we understood the entire environment related to international business, and why should there be a analysis of the country's environments, because risks are there, And then how do countries go global? What are the modes of entry in the international market? We studied that. Then we spoke about how do companies of different countries make an analysis of the environments before entering into that country. So we understood the country risk analysis. We spoke about investment analysis, the various forms of investment, how foreign exchange market actually functions, what are the different types of currencies which are being used, how do you go about converting currency of one country to another country. Then we spoke about international trade theories, right from mercantilism, absolute advantage, Adam Smith, comparative theory, Ricardo, Hixer-Ohlin, factor proportion theory. We spoke about Krugman's new theory. So all the theories we discussed. Then we spoke about what is balance of payment. We were discussing capital account, current account, visible trade, invisible trade. I showed you a pro forma also of balance of payment. Then we spoke about all kinds of trade policy instruments where we talk about tariff, non-tariff barriers which are there, and we were talking about duties in terms of tariff barriers, and we spoke about embargo and the small items which are there as a part of trade policy instruments. Then we talked about WTO, what is WTO, and when was it formed, how did it go about doing its operations, what kind of functions it has got, what is the structure of WTO, how does what who are the components in WTO. We spoke about that. Then we discussed about forms of foreign investment, FDI, FPI, FII, and how global monetary systems are changing from a gold standard to Bretton Woods standard to European Union, Brexit. We discussed about these things, and we also spoke about several bilateral and multilateral trade agreements, where we talked about today we talked about SARC, and we spoke about GATT, TRIPS, TRIMS. Those are all the agreements which are there. Then in India, what kind of issues are there which are related to what kind of institutions are there which are supporting foreign trade, and currently what kind of trends are happening, which we discussed in the afternoon session today. I hope these sessions which we have had for from this whole week have helped you to learn a little bit of I wouldn't say 100%, because in online I don't know whether anybody would be 100% effective. But even if a student has got a browsing knowledge about these topics, has a clarity of a general understanding of these topics, then I think the purpose of these classes would be upheld, in case you have understood what international business is all about and the components which we discussed in these international business in these classes. If you've got a knack of it, if you give one reading to your material, I think you should be good to go for the exam with this knowledge on international business. If there are any questions, you can get it clarified. This being our last class today.
Madam, how to write assignments, ma'am?
I'm sorry?
Assignments, regarding assignments.
What is your assignment pattern? I have no clue about it.
Each subject has 2 assignments, ma'am.
Okay.
In one assignments, 3 questions will be there. So
only 3 questions?
Big questions. In
how
each
much
question, 2 bits.
Marks? How many marks?
Each assignment 15 marks, each question 5 marks.
Oh, each question is 5 marks. No, so that means you got to write your understanding. If it is for 5 marks, you just write what is the concept. Say, for example, if I ask you if the assignment has a question on tariff, then first tell what is a tariff, then types of tariffs. So broad understanding of the concept. Say, for example, if the assignment is on intellectual property rights, then write what is IPR, then the various types of IPRs, copyright 2 lines, page 2 lines. So like that, you go ahead and write the basic understanding of that main topic and what are the types inside it or components inside it, that you keep writing that.
How many pages it should be for 5 marks?
I don't think there's a limit or number of pages as such, but because it's 5 marks, I don't think you should extend beyond 20 lines. If it is for 5 marks,
1 page.
I'm sorry?
20 lines means 1 page,
Yeah, it depends on your handwriting also.
Because 1 or 2 pages, yeah.
Yeah, different students have different styles of writing. So as teachers, we say not more than 20 lines. So those 20 lines you can write in 1 page, 2 pages. It's yeah, it's up to you. How do you write?
Okay, one more question, ma'am.
Yeah.
We have project in 4th semester.
Okay.
So we need a guide, ma'am.
Guide your college will allot. Your department will allot guides.
Actually, they are asking us to search for a guide.
I am registered as a guide with your university, but so far they allotted people to me. Nobody came to me randomly. So when the department sends only, we take. So your department will send.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Nothing related to the subject, questions or doubts and all. Anybody?
Everything is clear, ma'am.
Nice. All right then. Kishore sir, I'm done with it. He asked me to inform him before I wind up. So I'll give him a call. Sir, done with the class. Hello? I concluded, but I didn't sign out. You asked me to inform you, no? Yeah, please. Okay. Yeah. Sir wants to speak to you, so just be there for a minute. And then we can call it a day.
So Kumar? Sir. Huh?
So from today, it is the end of the today. So we are completing our classes.
Yes, sir.
So how do you feel about the class and all those things?
Very useful, sir.
Then, so you are writing your assignments, right?
Yeah, I have started writing.
Okay, I think you may have, some of the students may not have some books, something like that. And so after this, after Monday, I will go to the DNP and ask them. Okay. So madam is there. Madam, thank you, madam.
Thank you so much, sir, for having me.
Yes, madam. So Kumar and anyone, would you like to say anything?
This semester, I will learn so much from classes.
Okay.
And the faculty also very good faculty. We have got very experienced, and they're explaining very nicely. All these sessions are very useful.
Okay.
So I'm so thankful to Nadia ma'am, especially. Our class is very nice. We could learn so much.
Okay. So even we will rectify the issues, something like that, some of the disturbances and all, and because it is a technical, and the technical support should be there. So sometimes there may be some disturbance like that, and so by the next time we will come with more advanced learning, teaching and learning process. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, madam.
Sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good luck to all the students. Do well in future also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.